we're getting ready to run or start our installation on this section. Before I start, I want to make sure my flat area or that straight is centered. I'm going to show you how to do that and what that means. Right here we have an inside corner. So a good way to get my mark is by taking a scrap piece, and what I'll do is put this against the eave here. And then if you come around on the back side, right here is where I'm going to make a mark. So I'll just make a mark on the eave, and that will be the starting position of my track. Now that I have my mark, I'm going to line my track up on that mark. And what that mark represents is the overlapping between this track and our next track with that 45 and miter. So that's the distance that we will be coming out so that they can have a flush transition with each other. So putting my track on my mark here, I'm actually going to walk down the length of my track all the way down. And I'm going to make a mark at the end of this piece of track and move my full 7.5 piece track down to this mark, like so. And then I'm going to repeat that step, moving down that length of track. And again, on that mark, moving that full track down to get reset and continue on. Now we have one more mark. All right. And now, on our very last mark, we're going to run our full stick past the eave, putting it on our mark. And now we're going to mark the track right on the inside of this J channel where it's going to end. All right, we've just finished centering out our straight with our measurement. And it's implying that we're going to end this portion with a one light piece of track. Well, here at JellyFish, we want to have at least 2 lights on that track, if not more than so. So with it implying we're ending with a one light piece of track, how can I extend that or avoid that being the case? What I'm going to do with my starting piece is I'm actually going to cut out additional lights to start shortening my starting stick. And in doing so, it's now extended that gap that I would have at the end, moving those lights now to the end of the run. So instead of it being a one light piece of track, let's say I've cut 2 lights out of my starting stick, I will now end this portion with a 3 light piece of track. Much more manageable, much more meat for that clip to bite onto, so we have a nice secured track and light system. Okay, so now we have our mark of where our track would have ended. So given our measurement, it's implying that our last stick of track is 1 light and that much track distance after that light. We're just pulling the measurement and we're going to emphasize our mark. So if that's our mark and we were to mark this all the way around the track, how we can extend our ending piece is by cutting our starting piece shorter. Whatever we cut off of one end is going to allow us to extend the other end. So we're going to split the difference between our mark and a factory edge. So let's see where this is coming out to. And we're just over 3 inches. Look like we are 1 1/4 inches. 3 inches and 1/4, or 3 1/4 inch versus 4 3/8. So we want to split that difference. So what I will want to do is essentially cut off 3/4 inch from my starting piece to extend this 3/4 inch, and then we're going to be fairly consistent and even on both sides. So I can just put my square lined up at the end of the track, go to my 1 inch mark, if that's where I was going to cut it, mark that, slide my square down, and then make that cut all the way around so that I have a nice clean line that I can identify and follow with my snips to make that cut. You see on the corner here we avoided ending with a one light piece of track. This is why we cut back on our first stick on the right side, so when we fell or ended on the left side, we would not land on a light or end with that one light piece of track. I'm going to show you an example on a smaller scale, meaning this run is less of a length than that physical stick of track. So our track is 7.5 feet long. This is less than that. I want to center my lights on this portion. As a standard practice, most of us are going to grab a full stick, take it to the wall, see where that light lands, and cut and adjust from there. So in this application, I can see if I run factory, I'm going to be landing on a light against that wall. So I want to center these 5 lights here. And how I can do that is by removing some material from this track to bring that light over, shifting it down to incorporate that last one. And then we'll have that even distance of track or even length of track after our first light and before our last light. And if this area that we're installing is longer than this, we're going to make that adjustment in our first stick. So when we land on maybe that 3rd or 4th stick that we finish on, our lights are going to be centered. I'm going to remove some track from the left side, bringing this light in, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here. So I know if I cut in the middle, that's going to give me plenty of track, meaning I have at least 4 inches to work with on either side, and then I can trim it down from there. So I'll start with an excess of material, and then I'll remove what I do not need. So now that I have more of a manageable piece, given the surface area we're trying to cover, I want to remove some of this length to bring this light in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches because that's going to give me enough track removed off of this end to bring the next light in question in under the eave into a more centralized location. So that's how much track I've removed, and as a result, that's how far back I've brought this light that was sitting over here previously. So now, using our existing install as a reference for just this demonstration, I can see that I'm a little outside of where I want to be, centered-wise. In my opinion, the closest I could cut it, or I feel comfortable cutting it, is placing my square on that 1.5 inch mark on the hole of the light. That's going to give me my minimum amount of material remaining to fit that light and then have the ability to turn the corner. Anything less than that, I won't be able to conceal because that light itself is bigger than just that circle that we see. We're actually sitting about this wide inside the track. So I want to keep that in mind. So I could go 1.5 inches, but that's going to be my shortest. So I'm going to give myself a 1/2 inch to work with. So I'll put my 2-inch mark at the center of the hole, and I can mark it there. That's going to give me 2 inches of material past the center of this light, and that's what I want. It may be a little less, but I don't see it being any longer. And now when I go to put that piece back up, looks like this is more ideal of placement that we're looking for. So if I have 2 inches on this side, I should also have 2 inches on this side from the center of that light, and as a result, my lights are centered for that length that we're installing on that surface. Now that I've made that ideal length cut on one side, that side that I've already prepped, I could take against the surface, and then I will mark the track under the eave of where that track is going to end. And then anything past my mark will be removed. And then from my mark, we're going to 45 the track so that it can incorporate that return piece. And we'll do this in 2 steps, cutting it, test fitting it, marking it. That's going to give us the tightest tolerance given that section that we're working on. So from that outside mark, I'll take my square, nice clean 90-degree line, and then across the face, we're not going to do a 90, we're actually going to 45 that. And that's preference. I like to do my 45s on my longer side, or if it's my peak, I'll do the 45 on the angled side. So now that we have our marks, we're going to go ahead and cut and remove that excess material. Getting that tab out of my way. Same thing on this side. Tabs are out of my way, now I can come right across that face. Just like so. Now, we'll put it up just to show you. We have 2 inches on this side, and also 2 inches on our longest side. And then we have centered our lights for this section that we're installing. So another way that we can center straight, particularly on a case like this where the piece we need is 24 inches in length, or 2 feet. Instead of putting the track up, I can actually prep that on the ground. And an easy way for me to center those lights, it may be 2 lights, it may be 3, I can easily identify that and center it with just my tape and my stick. So I can have that stick of track on the ground. Using my tape measure, I can either start at the end just to get a rough idea of where that may land, and then I can pull my tape accordingly to where I want those lights to land to center that straight. So if I'm needing a 24-inch piece of track and I want to center my, which looks like 3 lights in this case, what I'm looking at is how much of my tape is remaining after and before these 2 lights. And then I will shift it accordingly to evenly measure that out. So let's say if we start at 3 here, or I can even go off of 12 in the center, mark the end of the tape, and then right here at 24, mark that as well. So my cut marks will be here, taking off that much from a factory cut, and then cutting here, leaving the remainder of that full stick. So we've discussed centering our lights on a straight or a flat area. A peak is a little bit different because we're going to have that center or peak light. Everything will be 9 inches from there, so it's kind of a set it and see where we land. Well, maybe we land on a corner. In this case, if we were to land where we need to bend that track, or we land on the corner, or where we're tying into other pieces of aluminum, we don't want this light to be on that corner. So if we've landed on the corner, we're going to need to bring it back or extend it past it to eliminate that light. In most cases, we're going to bring it back so that we can include that light and therefore it doesn't land on the corner. How we do that is going to be a variable. It could be the number of sticks we're installing on just that one side of the peak. It could be the adjustment that we're making in the top or in the seams. Basically, the distance we need to pull that light back. Is it just an inch or so we need to come back? Is it about 2 inches? Given that distance, we may make different adjustments. If it's just maybe a ½ inch, maybe I'll just cut that right out of the peak, and this is going to be 8.5 inch spacing, but given that angle, it will appear as still 9 inches. Maybe it's substantial, and we need to take it out of more than just one area. Let's say this was 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece for this section. I may make a slight adjustment, meaning maybe I'm removing a 1/4 inch of material. The next seam, removing a 1/4 inch of material. And that third seam, removing a 1/4 inch of material. And now, at this light that previously was on the corner, collectively with those cuts, we've brought that light back 3/4 of an inch. That may be all we need, and now we can make our cut and go around the corner. So if we land on a corner, we're going to remove some material from our seams and even that initial peak starting piece to bring back that light, that distance that we need.